Is this recording right? We're in the right thing.
I don't know what you pressed.
Yeah, it's all right. I've put it in the cloud. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Freedom Thinking. Welcome to the 3-day online retreat. I'll see if I do a bit better over the 3 days. It's a good start. Welcome to our retreat, and thank you everybody who's joined us so far. That we know that some people can't make it to the actual day, and so we record these, and these recordings are being sent out. They're floated on YouTube for anybody to look at any time. This is a via donation retreat, and what we mean by that is we haven't asked for any kind of fixed amount to be paid to us for our time doing this retreat. Some people don't pay a thing, and some people donate to us. But we do this because we are aware that at this time there are many people who are struggling financially, and we still want them to have access. We still want people to have access to the 3 days and hopefully gain some evolution along the way that helps make their lives easier. So that's why we do this via donation. We do it because we just want to help out, and we love it, in all fairness. And generally, we've been very well looked after. People have been very generous. So we thank everybody who's made donations already. And some of those people we know can't be here today. They've made donations for the recordings. So I am going to politely ask that if you come across this on YouTube and you do find this useful, and you'd like to make a donation to Freedom Thinking, our PayPal is info@freedomthinking.co.uk, which is also our email address if you want to get in touch with us.
And also we have said if people are unable to donate, please pay it forward with an act of kindness. It's been really cool I think this is like a 5th via donation online event, or maybe even 6th, to hear the things that people think of to do, to pay it forward and to do something kind for someone else. So if you cannot financially, I feel like energetically it's nice to pay it forward in some way, so just do something kind for someone else. And then if you can, let us know what it is. We always love to hear. We do
love to hear what people have been up to. And so that's kind of marketing out the way. We've got 2 spaces left on our Devon retreat, which is next month. If anybody's interested, we've got a 4-day in-person retreat in Devon in a beautiful house, open water swimming. We do a bit of open water swimming, and there's 4 days of exploration. If anybody's interested, 2 places left. So without further ado, anybody's interested in that, get in touch. I just wanted to read our mission statement, because there'll be people, I'm sure, who've never come across us before. I've got a clue who the hell we are. And I'm just going to read our mission statement so you can get a feel for ourselves. My name's Dave Elleray. And this is
Jenny
Elleray. And this is Lucia Elleray. And we got Rusty down here. He's the Jack Russell. If you see me looking distracted, it's probably because he's weeing on the carpet or something like that, doing something he shouldn't be doing. But hopefully he's laid down now, so hopefully it should be good. So I'll just a little bit about our vision statement. This vision statement is on our website, and this is something that Jen and I, this is the inspiration for our work. This is what we hope to help create. Our vision. We see a world united in understanding and common humanity, where every individual realizes their own connection, innate resilience, creativity, and potential to create a life which they thrive and flourish in. We see a world where all people are understood, appreciated, valued, and included in the creation of a viable existence for every living being, and the well-being of the whole takes sustainable precedence. That's our vision. That's what we hope. That's what we hope to help to create. And we think that humanity is heading in the right direction for this. We're really optimistic. So this morning, It's a bit of an introduction to ourselves and an introduction to the 3 principles. We're going to be going now till about 11:15, so about an hour. We'll try not to bore the crap out of everyone, but a little bit of introduction to the 3 principles, the inspiration behind Jenny and myself's work, and a little bit of an introduction to ourselves and why we sit here now running this retreat. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, can do. Yeah, we said we're going to keep it brief. We're going to nudge each other if it gets too long. Yeah. It's so weird. I've introduced myself so many times and spoken a bit about how I came across this in my story, and it's different every single time in that it's what's relevant to me now. So I came across the 3 principles in 2005. I'd just been away traveling for a year in New Zealand. I got back, my sister had made all these new friends and was telling me all about 3 principles, and I had no idea what she was talking about. And it was at a point in my life where I felt like I functioned fine. You know, I'd been traveling, but I look back and I think, God, where was I? I was in New Zealand, most amazing place. And I definitely had moments of presence and enjoyed it, but it always amazed me how I'd go to these incredible places and I'd take my own mind with me and still suffer my anxieties and my worries. And it was another one of those cases where I'd kind of set myself up that when I get to New Zealand, I'm somehow going to be different, and I'd get there and my mind was still there. And it was so interesting coming back, and I'd only been back about 3 weeks when I went to the training in London with Dr. Roger Mills and a lady called Margaret Opio. And over the 3 days, it felt like kind of any question I'd ever had about life started to kind of get answered. Any question I'd had about myself got answered. And this kind of creation of who I thought I was as a shy, insecure person prone to depression, struggled with eating disorders, like all of that got seen as a story. And it's just this weird space of, oh my God, if I'm not that, then what am I? And I didn't get an answer to the what am I bit, but I started to get a sense that I was something so much greater than anything I'd thought before. I started to feel quite kind of liberated and open again, a bit like I see Lucia, like this just open space of like, everyone just says she seems to really enjoy life, like she's just so up for like what next. She has her moments, but most of the time she's just so open. And I felt that's what happened. And you often describe, you'll talk about it, that your days are like your birthday, the day you really started to live. And it felt a little bit like that. I went into a 3-day training feeling like a failure, I guess, in life, like a fraud and someone who struggled. And I walked out feeling like anything's possible. Life's amazing. What next? And I started to see how I could have traveled to so many beautiful places and done so many beautiful things, but not felt present or that I enjoyed them. Like I should be really enjoying looking at this amazing scenery, but I still feel totally insecure and awful inside. I started to see the relationship between my own mind and my own experience. I could see that our experience isn't coming at us from out there, that it's an internal creation within our own mind. And it just made sense of so many things. And I knew that I wanted to share this with other people. So going from somebody who I'd cross the road rather than speak to someone that like my parents knew or something, I'd be like, oh my God, it's so embarrassing, I can't talk to anyone, to going, I want to share this with people. There's a simple message that we're going to be sharing again and again and again over these 3 days that has the power to wake us up, to transform our own life, regardless of our circumstance, regardless of our past, regardless of whether we've been given labels. It's beyond any of that. And I just asked people to, because I feel like I was sideswiped with this. I hadn't got any kind of I didn't go in with an expectation. I just thought, my sister's going along, I'll get to spend time with her. My auntie was going, my cousin was going, so we kind of all rocked up in London together and got to go out for lunches together. I did not expect to go from the place I'd lived in for so much of my life, of struggle and suffering, to just beauty and presence and stillness. And I can honestly say, over the last 17 years, I haven't stayed in that space. I've been in and out of all different experiences, but whatever shifted in me in 2005 and woke up in me in 2005 has continued to grow, has continued to teach me. It's humbled me. I've gained in compassion and love for other people, because I get to see how compelling our stories can be. But I can say it's been this just upward or outward, I don't know how to describe it, expanse as a human being, and my ability to deal with anything that life's thrown at me. So I just encourage people to, if they can, put down what even they think they know, even if they've been around this a while, and just listen new, completely listen new, because there's something to be heard. And I've loved, teaching alongside Dave for the last 7 years, or 8 years really. I get to hear his story and his understanding, and I listen, and suddenly I'll be like, wow, is that what he's been trying to say? And I've heard the story 10 times before. So please, even if you've heard things before, keep listening, because there's something that we get to hear, and it's from within us, and the stories become just a guide to within us. But yeah, thank you for joining us. And if at any point you have a question, you can type it in the chat. We have got space for that over the 3 days. But if something's really on your mind and you're struggling to listen because you've got this burning question, or just type it in the chat and we'll address it. Because if you're holding a question in your head, you're not really listening. So yeah, please feel free to do that.
Yeah, cheers, Jen. Yeah, so my background wasn't anything like this work I do now. I was a tree surgeon, as some people know on this screen. I ended up in tree surgery because I failed my college course. I took too many drugs and had too much of a good time. Didn't really put the work in, and within 6 months of failing my college course, I found myself in prison for violence. And I kind of thought my life was over. 21, I thought I'd nailed the final nail in the coffin for my life. Yeah, so I decided at that point I wanted to become a tree surgeon, and became a tree surgeon and started my own business, which I ran for 17 years. Yeah, I enjoyed the crack with the lads and the lassies, but I never really felt it was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. So therefore I ran all my machinery into the ground within about 6 years and never replaced it, because I thought this is going to come to an end soon. 11 years later, 11 years, I pretty much worked with crap machinery and made my life so difficult. Yeah, and throughout that period, I really struggled with depression and anxiety. And one of the ways that my anxieties manifested themselves was as a hard man. I was a big lad. I climbed trees every day, and I carried around big lumps of wood every day. I was a big boy and was pretty strong and pretty fit. But inside of me was this little insecure man. And I still have hangovers of that, because when I go and try on a shirt or something in a shop, I'll pick up a shirt and go, "Do you like this, Jen?" She goes, "That's never going to fit you." I still see myself as quite small in a funny way. It's bizarre. It's funny. But in 2013, in 2012, I had a big, catastrophic breakdown in my life. I ended up having an affair, and I ended up leaving my wife. It was a very messy period of time, very humbling. You used the word humbling, a very humbling time. One where I used to have such judgment of people who had affairs. In fact, my friends who had affairs, I'd been known over time to ring them up, a few of them, and say, what you doing? You're so selfish. You don't know what you're doing to that person. You're having your cake and eating it, I remember saying to people. And life has a way of really humbling us. I was deeply humbled by the pain and the stress of having an affair, having feelings for somebody else when I was married, had a house, had a beautiful wife, she's a fantastic friend, still a fantastic friend. We have a very nice relationship, but it's been difficult. 2013, I got to the point where I wanted to kill myself, and I had two experiences in 2013 that awoke something within myself. The first one was what I think was the experience of death. I'd been in a fight and I set off walking home from Scotland, and I remember I was
Dave lives in, well, we live in the Lake District. You lived in the Lake District.
My apologies, yeah.
Quite away from Scotland.
Yeah, so I was walking 400 miles after this fight. I'd had enough. I'm going home, lads. I'm going home. Set off walking home from Torridon, if anybody knows it. Back to the Lake District, 400 miles, about 11 o'clock at night, pissed out my head. And from what I remember, I fell down a banking. And it was in that moment where I entered, it entered, either I entered it or it entered me, or perhaps it's both at the same time. It's just words, I can't really explain it. The most beautiful space. It wasn't of this body. And it was the most unconditional, drenching, accepting love. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave that space. I was so home there. It was so real. And when I say it was so real, it was more real than this moment now that I'm experiencing now. It's more real. And in that space, I believe I met an angel. Her name was Lucy. And I found myself against my will going back into my body, which bizarrely, if my memory is correct, I wasn't sat in the middle of the road when it actually started, this event started. But now I found my body sat in the middle of the road. And I remember screaming, please don't leave me here, and crying, hey, open. Please don't leave me here. And I was crying my eyes out. But I remember sitting there going, no matter what happens in this life, I know that's real. I knew it was real. And from that moment on, or perhaps 2 days actually on, because the next day I spent recovering in the van. I didn't walk home. I realized I could ask for things to come into the world, and events would take place, miracles. I could just ask for it to happen and it would happen. I did get home and it was a miracle. I won't bore people with the details. It was a miracle. One miracle after another got me home. The one thing it didn't do was bring me happiness and peace and get rid of my depression. I asked for that. And that's when I got asked to go around as a tree surgeon to go and see a lady who I saw as a therapist 6 months before. I only saw her once. She phoned me up and said, I've got a tree for you to look at. Would you come and have a look at it? So I went round to her new house and I had a wander around her garden. It's not massive. It wasn't difficult to see. There wasn't a tree in this garden. And I knocked on the door. I was quite an angry man back then, and I was pissed off at the fact I was piss wet through, and wasn't a tree in this garden. I just wanted to go home. I'd had a hard day at work. And she opened the door and she sat me down and she said to me, I'll never forget, she said to me, if I told you why I had to get you here, you wouldn't have come, would you? I said, I don't know. Her name's Sue Huginson from Windermere. I said, I don't know, Sue. Why have you got me here? She said, because I've been told I need to teach you something. And I said to her, and who's told you what? I was thinking to myself, whoever that is, I'm going to be having words with them for speaking about me behind my back. Quite a big ego back then. Still do. But it was humongous back then. And she just looked at me and said, the universe, Dave. I remember thinking, oh, for fuck's sake. But Sue's got a twinkle in her eye. Anybody who meets Sue knows she's got a twinkle in her eye. And Sue's the lady who introduced me to Sid Banks. He died by this point, but she introduced me to the teachings of Sid Banks. And I remember the first time she ever spoke, I remember bursting into tears. And I remember her saying to me, why are you crying, Dave? I said, because you're the first person I've spoken to. I'd spoken to many therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, counselors, the Samaritans. Sorry, 1976. Sorry, love. She was the first person who spoke sense to me. And what she did was she spoke about nature. She didn't start exploring my problems. I remember saying, I think what you're talking about is what some people will call God, but I call nature. She said, yes. 9 weeks we conversed. Before one day she rang me up and went, Dave, all you've done, she gave me a right ass kicking. She told me, in fact, they were her words, I'm going to give you an ass kicking, Dave, because all you've done is take from me. You've never bought any of Sid Banks's books. You've never looked him up on YouTube. At the time, there was 4 videos of Sid on YouTube, 2013. Whoever put them up. Do you know who it was?
I think it was Mississippi Buddha, he called himself at one point.
Thank you, Mississippi Buddha.
I can't remember his name.
Thank you for putting them up, whoever you are.
Okay, Buddy Huggins.
Buddy Huggins, God bless you, man. He's never going to see this, but thank you, Buddy. Yeah, Sue rang me up and said, I'm giving you ass kicking, Dave, all you've done is take from me. And I knew she was right, I had. So she said, you haven't even looked at Sid, you haven't bought a book. So I typed in Sid Banks into YouTube and there was 4 videos and I just watched them. And there was one thing that kind of stuck in my mind as he said it. He said these words, you think it's real. You think it's real. It's not real. Stop working from the illusion. I'd had an experience of a reality more real than this reality. I could feel something growing within myself, something I could never put my finger on. I could feel it. And with that, I went for a walk, took the morning off work, and I took the whole day off work. Now unusual there, I was quite good at that. And Rusty and I jumped in the van and we were going to go for a walk. And before I even got to the walk, I felt the need to pull over on the side of the road. I pulled over and I just stood staring. I was getting filled with this kind of experience. And as I was stood there, a jackdaw, which is a type of crow in the UK, the small crow with a grey head and these like, beautiful light eyes, flew over me. And as it flew over me, I was just watching it. It looked at me as it flew over. I was looking at it and it carried on its way down the field, flew down the field and off it went. But in that moment, I had another experience that I can't really explain. It was, again, it was the most divine love, engulfing divine love. But this experience was, I called it more earthbound. It was more grounding, really. But when I say grounding, I left my body. And I could travel. I could travel through into a woodland, which I could see. I was present in the woodland. I came back and I could see my own body stood up on the other side of the wall. And then I entered into I traveled into time to a time when a girlfriend and I were having a bit of a disagreement, and these are bits that I remember, and I was there witnessing it in real time as it was taking place. And I could see a dynamic between us that I couldn't see when I was stood in my physical body. That wasn't healthy. And I was told that humanity, there are gifts within consciousness and thought that humanity isn't consciously evolved enough yet to fully utilize, but they will become it. It was a funny old thing that took place, and to this day, I always said that I was shown behind reality. A few months ago, I was walking and I questioned that. Was I shown behind reality, or did I enter into a higher dimension of reality within myself? I think that's probably more accurate. I think the first experience of the divine love was being shown behind reality. That's how I see it now. That first experience of divine love, I know, is at the heart of everybody and everything. It's a true reality. And I remember I always used to think to myself growing up, I wonder if there's something special about me. And if there's something special about Dave. And then coming into my body and very, very quickly realizing there's something so special about me. It's unbelievable how special I am. But I'm equally as special as every other person and thing in this universe. Equally as special. We're all so special, we just can't see it because we're so tied up in our thought creations, in our beliefs, in our realities. And from that moment on, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to help people. I wanted to help people wake up. I called it, like Jen said, I called it my birthday. Because it was like the first day I ever truly stepped onto planet Earth, but it was a new Earth. It was a new world. I walked into a new world, a world where I no longer met people who wanted to confront me and fight me like what I had previously. Everybody, I came across such aggression everywhere, drivers, people when I went out. I never got into a fight since when I went out, but I got into a fight every weekend. But it stopped the moment I shifted. And those people just stopped being in my reality. And from time to time, I come across somebody who I used to have a Barney with, and I meet them with a hug. And I think what grew in that, I think some people may call it heart opening. Now, I don't know what other people mean when they say heart opening. I can only give my definition from my experience, but my definition of heart opening is finding more and more love and acceptance for the world, for people, and for myself. That's my definition of heart opening. Yeah, Sid, do you want to talk a bit about Sid? Because we don't really talk about Sid insofar as a guru. We're not talking about Sid as a guru, as somebody to be worshipped, but I like to pay respect to a man whose words had such a profound impact on my life. And I know on yours, and to many people's.
Yes, I only got to meet Sid once, which I'm so grateful for. And again, it's another reason why we do these things via donation, because it was at a time where I really didn't have any money, and I got a reduced rate and actually borrowed the money from my dad, and it was amazing that I actually got to go and see him. But I never want finance to get in the way of people hearing this. And I know there's been quite a lot of online talk about via donation events and whether you should and shouldn't, and I've always just said to Dave, like, it really makes my heart sing to do these, and you're the same, so we'll continue to do them as long as it makes sense to us. But Sydney Banks he spent his life from the moment he had his experience sharing and giving this away. And he was very lucky that he got supported by psychologists and different people who've been impacted by his work. They helped support him with his message, but he just gave and gave and gave of this. So I kind of feel like he is not a guru to me, but I think he's an example of somebody who lived a life of service, and I respect that, and it kind of inspires me. But he has a DVD, and I think it is online, and it's called The Experience, where he will talk about what happened to him. And I think I won't do his story justice, but he went from being a very insecure man to being a very present, secure human being. And the way that he describes it is that he kept signing up to go on this relationship workshop, and then he kept cancelling, and then he'd sign up and then he'd cancel. And finally, after I think 2 or 3 times, the lady recognised his voice and said, if you sign up this time, you've got to come. So him and his wife found themselves on a retreat somewhere in Canada. I think on Vancouver Island, I'm not sure. And they had to sort of stand, like there was people stood up in the middle of the room screaming at each other, and it's about getting anger out. And him and his wife were just thinking, we could do this at home. And I think they were planning on leaving the next day. And he'd had a conversation with a young psychologist who was on this retreat, also a participant, the day before. And apparently he'd ran up to him and said, what Sid heard him say was, you're not insecure, you just think you're insecure. And Sid said to him, do you realise what you just said? Because something had like sparked in him, and the guy was, of course I do. And Sid saw in that moment he hadn't realised what he'd said. And after that, he didn't sleep for 3 days and 3 nights. He was just getting filled with insight and revelation. He said he was like almost buzzing. And then he was sat in the living room with his mother-in-law and his wife. And they were stood up in the kitchen, and they were having a bit of a squabble. And he said he stood up to say something to them, but instead of saying something, he looked out the window across at the sea, and he had this experience of what he said, death of ego. He didn't just have a near-death experience, he went through the process of death. And then was suddenly back in his body, and he had looked at his wife and his mother-in-law and said, I'm home, I'm free, I've conquered this world. We're going to travel changing psychology and psychiatry. And he said his mother-in-law and his wife just kind of looked at him, and he's thinking, God, I look crazy. So then he started talking about welding, which again made them think, what the hell's going on? Because he never spoke about his work, because he was a welder. And he doesn't know how it happened, but from then, people started coming to Salt Spring Island to listen to him. Different people on the island started to flock to him. He started sort of doing talks in his living room, and some of the people that went to him were psychologists and psychiatrists who got humble enough to listen to him. People with doctorates, people who had studied and learned, managed to put down what they thought they knew and listen to this very humble man. He wasn't hugely educated, but he saw something, or had an experience, or had this enlightenment experience, and then started to share. And he sometimes would have to ask his wife afterwards, what did that word mean? Did that make sense? Did I use it in context? Because what he was sharing wasn't coming from his intellect. It wasn't coming from anything he'd learned. It was new. And what he had realized was that we are all part of this one divine mind. He called it mind. And we have access to that infinite knowledge, that we all are part of this one divine consciousness, this space, and that we all have the power of thought to create. And initially when he spoke, he didn't speak about the three principles, but he always spoke about them, but not as the three principles. That was actually a term he started using, I think, in the 90s, early 90s. And he had his experience in 1973. But he used these three words to describe what creates all life. And he said, you know, these three words are literally pointing to something that it doesn't have words, isn't of the world of form. But he could see that we all had divine intelligence, which he called mind, running through us. We were made of it. That we all had consciousness, awareness. We were all consciously aware. And we all had the power of thought within us to create any experience. And the way that he shared with people was never from a place of he had something they didn't, or that you need to listen to me. He was always pointing people back within themselves, in the same way that I feel within any kind of philosophy or religion, anyone that's had these kind of experiences have pointed people back within. And I think sometimes that's such an annoying statement, because people are like, within what? Within this body, within. And again, that's something that's really hard to describe to people, but it's something that we've all had an experience of. We've all heard from within ourselves. Not that what we've learned before, but we've touched on a space within us that's before the creation of who we think we are. And it's funny, I can't sometimes listen to different talks on the three principles, or I listen to Sid, or I read a blog, and I just hear all this language and these words, and it kind of amazes me that people actually kind of wake up and really hear what they're trying to be pointed to, because words are so clumsy. We've got so many, like, I know that words that I use mean something different to me than they do to Dave. So to anyone on here, we're all going to have different relationships to words. They're purely a guide. You know, in any of Sid's talks, he'd say, don't listen to the words, which is confusing when you're sat on a webinar or sat in a room with a talk. But it's not coming from us to you. It's coming from within you. We're purely trying to point to something. And amazingly, through the messy medium of words and story
and frequency, people hear stuff. And the way that I know it doesn't come from me is when I'm speaking to people or hearing insights people have had. It's in a language that I don't use. It's literally from within them, from within that deeper mind, that deeper intelligence that we all are part of. But I want to speak for myself. I know I had limited myself to the character and the creation, the form in which thought had taken. And because I didn't know any different, I lived out of it. But on those 3 days, something woke up within me that when I look back, it had always been there. I'd questioned it and doubted it, but it'd always been there. This understanding or this knowledge of the deeper aspect of life. And I do encourage people, if they are able to get on YouTube and watch some of Sid's stuff, because I do think he's a beautiful speaker. He's got some lovely books, but it's not because he's our guru or anything. It's purely because I feel he had such a simple, humble way of sharing that it can cut through the intellect a lot of the time. Yeah.
And just kind of speak to that place.
I remember Sue saying to me, Dave, there's nothing for you to do. I've actually just realised I'm totally camouflaged with the sofa.
That's true.
Yeah. I'll have to move my arms a bit so you know me.
It's just a head.
Just a head with a white bit. Yeah, Sue said to me, there's nothing to do, Dave. And I thought, well, I'm lazy as hell. I'm down with a bit of that. Let's give it a go. That's one of the things that she said to me right at the beginning. There's nothing for you to do. Thankfully, like I say, I was lazy enough that I didn't question that. I didn't try and push her on it. But if there's nothing to do, there must be something to do. There really isn't anything to do. I can promise people that there really isn't anything that they need to do. It's just a case of just listening, really. We've been really privileged. One of the things I asked for was that I got to travel the world and share this, and I got to travel the world and share it in some parts of the world and with demographics that are so different to rural Cumbria. And I've got to share through translators, and I've got to share with groups of people that don't even like us. And I've got to see these people change in front of my eyes. I don't claim any credit for any of it, by the way. I don't sit here as an expert. And I don't take any credit for it because I can't take any credit for it. People have their favorite gurus. Maybe it's 3 principles, maybe it's not. I don't really. My heroes are the ones that hear. They're my heroes. Those that are brave enough to listen and to step up, step out. As my sister once described it, she said, it was like I unzipped myself and walked out of my old self, leaving an old withered skin behind me. Those are my heroes. The people who are brave enough to change. That's not an intellectual thing. There's nothing to do. There really isn't anything to do. Sid always said, you look for a feeling. I'll give you a clue. The feeling isn't negative. The feeling isn't something you feel uncomfortable with and dislike. It doesn't come from a judgment. But other than that, I'm going to leave it all alone for people. People tell me they want to have my experience. You can't. I couldn't have Sid's, can't have Jen's, Jen couldn't have mine. I couldn't have yours. It was my experience. It was what was right for me. And people have experiences that are right for them. So don't go, if you have an idea as to what you think you are looking for, it's not that. Because trust me, if it was that, you've already thought what you think it is, and it hasn't helped. So it can't be that. And I can promise you it's not that. If people are sitting, trying to memorize all this, don't bother. Nothing to do. It's a waste of time. You clog yourself up. Tire yourself out. It's not found there. You're already it. I'm probably going to completely ruin this, but we're talking about silence on a community group once. And my sister said, you know, the silence you're looking for isn't you not thinking. It's just being here. That's all it is. That's your gateway. That's your door. This isn't turning thought or ego into an enemy. There's no enemy. This isn't about getting rid of thoughts. We've tried that. It's a time immemorial. The moment we try and get rid of thoughts, we create a war within ourselves, against ourselves, to which there is no victor, only suffering. So this is not about getting rid of thoughts. In fact, you'll very rarely hear Jenny and I actually talk about thoughts. There's no point. People come, what about this thought? What about that thought? You could go on like that forever, because the mind will continuously create thoughts. You'll hear us talk about the power of thought. And for an easy way to kind of talk about that in a kind of metaphor, you could liken every wave on the ocean to being a thought. Something that's temporary, something that comes and goes. They all look different. Some are big and some are small. Some appear powerful and some appear little ripples. They only exist on the surface. But Jenny and I are talking about the ocean. Every single wave is made of water. It doesn't matter how big it is. It doesn't matter whether it's rolling, whether it's a little crest and trough. It doesn't matter. It's just a tiny little ripple. It's always made of water. Tsunami to ripple is made of water. One thing. It's all made of ocean. You take a sample of the tsunami to a laboratory and tell me, what's that made out of? Take a sample of the ripple and say, take it to a laboratory and say, what's that one made of? And they'll just look at it and go, it's exactly the same thing. Its fabric is the same stuff. So you won't hear us talking about thoughts or thinking. Sydney Banks would say you're looking to raise your level of consciousness. Scientists would describe that as you are raising your frequency of being. If everything is energy, then everything is frequency. To this day, I don't know what energy is. And I don't know anybody who does. The formlessness that takes form, whether that be in the physical or in the mental, in the experiential. It's love. But do I know what love is? No. Other than the creative force of everything. Our heart center. When I say our heart center, I'm not talking about the physical heart. I'm talking about the center of being through which the body comes into being. Through which everything comes into being. We've lived in a very Newtonian time, which has disregarded the spirit in favor of hard science that can be viewed under a microscope or measured with a tape measure or weighed. And we've become very limited in our culture, which has created a real victimhood. And I can understand why that is. Because we spend so long looking at the form without taking time out to consider what creates. And that's just like reality. One of the first questions I like to ask people is, if you're coming to us with having a hard life, what is life? What is life? I often hear people saying, life's hard, Dave. Well, no, life's effortless. Life is effortless. It's livingness. You don't effort to live. Living just exists. Life just exists. But what we confuse life for is how the form of reality that we create through the life force of life. Hope that makes sense. What we confuse for life is the reality that we encounter whilst living. And hopefully over this next 3 days, people will start to understand life, because as they start to understand life, they start to understand reality. Again, a question very few people ask: what is reality? Jen and I'll take you to the depths that we've seen. We can talk from the level that we've seen. Some people say we've seen deep. I don't know. It's infinite, so how can you have a measurement upon the infinite? There's always deeper to see. I know that much. In fact, if anything, we have barely scratched the surface. Barely scratched the surface. That's what I think I know about that. I don't know what thought is. I don't know what mind is. I don't know what consciousness is. They're three attributes of a singular force, of love, of which I don't know what love is. So really, how can I really know anything if I don't even know what the fabric of existence itself is? To think I know anything about it is really deluding myself. But I do understand why wise people throughout time have said, I know I'm wise, for I know nothing. That starts to make sense.
It's interesting as well. One of the things that really helped me is a phrase that you really don't like and didn't impact you at all originally. And it was started for me to see the relationship between thought and feeling. Like I'd say, the two kind of things that I took away from my first experience of the three principles was the relationship between thought and feeling. And I think Roger said, if you're thinking it, you're feeling it. And for me, that was huge, because I thought what I was feeling were other people's opinions of me, were situations. It felt like a room full of people could give me a feeling. It felt like having to go for a job interview could give me a feeling. So suddenly, like, for me, that was huge. I'm living in the experience of thought. What I feel comes from thought. What I feel comes from within me. And it was buzzy, the feeling I got with that, because it's like I have lived as if other people create my feeling. I have lived as if the world creates my feeling. I have lived as if the past creates my feeling. I've lived as if my future can create my feeling. And one of the little thoughts that popped into my head as I was listening to this was, well, yeah, if I've had a job interview, or when I was at school, if I had an exam, I could be in bed and still feel incredibly anxious and nervous. I'm in bed. I'm not even there. And I remember thinking, wow, it has to be my own mind. I started to see that invisible, instantaneous connection between thought and feeling. Like, that's where experience comes from. And it's so tricky, because you don't even have to see what the thought is, but you'll be in the experience. And then I think the other thing that really, really was what kind of blew me away was, but there's this deeper intelligence to life that knows how to live us. There's this deeper aspect, this deeper nature that we all are part of, we are all made from, and that we have access to that in any moment. It's what beats our heart, does our immune system, does the endocrine system. It also lives us. It's everything. And it kind of, in a way, I guess, within a religious context, people would call that God, but I wasn't religious, so I didn't really have anything that I ever looked to as a young person to to feel that I was more than what I was in my thinking. So suddenly I had this sense of something far bigger than me, who I thought I was. And that totally blew my mind. And what I loved was that it was so self-proving, because I was sat there as evidence, because I'd gone from being incredibly shy and anxious to suddenly just feeling comfortable and okay. So given a change of thought, a shift in consciousness, I lived in a new experience. That's what Sid was pointing us towards. In any moment, I think he says it in one of his books, we're one thought away from happiness. We're one thought away from sadness. It's all in thought. So my reality completely shifted and changed because I was gifted new thought. But actually, we are always in a position where we could be gifted new thought. But I didn't ever know to look for it. I didn't even know to. I just got lost in my own story and thought the same thoughts over and over and again. And the more I'd thought them, that's really distracting.
Sorry.
The more I'd thought them, the more real they became. And because I thought I'd thought them for such a long time, that made them more real. They're not. Similar to what Dave said, he heard Sid saying in that first talk he ever listened to, you think it's real, it's not. I thought who I thought I was real and true and fixed and solid and had power. And then I sat there in a completely new experience. My past hadn't changed. My situation hadn't changed. My name hadn't changed. Nothing had changed. And I sat in a new feeling. What is it really that creates? What is it really that we are? What is the constant? Well, it's definitely not the feeling isn't the constant. It can't be, because that changes. What I think isn't the constant, because that changes. The fact of thought, the fact of experience or feeling is the constant. And suddenly the quality or the flavor that experience showed up as became less important to me. And I got really fascinated by what is it? What is it that we are? What is this stuff that can create any experience? What is this stuff that creates life? What is living me? What is living you? What is living out there? What is out there? Like suddenly my mind started posing way bigger questions to me. I'd spent years studying myself and my thinking, and I'd kind of got worse rather than better. I wasn't getting happier. And I didn't know anything different. You know, I'd gone to incredibly kind people, incredibly qualified people who sat and studied my thinking with me. I was trying really hard to be a good person. I was trying really hard to be better. And it's only when I came across this, I realized how, no, that just tied you up in knots and tangled you up, because your mind can always throw up new problems, new thoughts that are troubling to you, and new memories that you're, oh God, and then that happened and it made me feel like this. And I'd spent years looking at all of that.
Yeah, it reinforces your story, doesn't it?
And suddenly my story got completely blown apart and seen for what it was. And I was still there. And again, that was fascinating to me. So my story changed. It vanished. I was like, wow, I'm not shy and insecure. I just think I am. But I was still there. Who is this I bit that's still there? And I think that's something, again, that was a new question for me. It was a bigger question. It took my mind to different places. It felt different. And that's what I know is possible for anyone. And I came away knowing I was never broken. I just thought I was. I'd done all this stuff to try and fix myself. I could not be fixed because I wasn't broken. And that's what I knew to be true for everyone. And I felt like I always said that was, in my mind, Roger's superpower. He saw through people's stories, people's behavior, people's pasts, and saw straight to the health within them, is how he called it. He saw health within people that lost sight of their own health. And he worked with downtrodden communities in America, he worked within mental health, he worked in hospitals, he worked across the board with people with all kinds of diagnoses and labels, people who'd been in and out of prison their whole lives, people on drugs, people with the most disastrous lives. And I think that really inspired me, because I thought, he knows I'm okay. He knows people are okay. And he knew it like he knew it like he knew it. And then that woke up within me. And I then get to see that in other people. Like, I've had the absolute privilege of traveling the world since the age of 23, meeting people who share this, meeting people who have changed through this understanding. Me and my ex-husband Rudy created Three Principles movies that was full of all the footage that we filmed from around the world of facilitators, trainings within the prison system, within business training, within homeless shelters. I don't actually know where this footage is now. I think it's been given to the Three Principles Global Community website. I'm trying to track it down, because when Rudy and I separated, I gave it to him to have on his site, Innate Evolution, but it's no longer there. So I'm trying to track it down, because there's some fantastic stuff on there. You don't have to take my word for it. Like, there's people sat in prison, in jail, speaking about their experience of finding peace, finding happiness and contentment, despite the fact they're in prison. And that, again, was one of those times I got to continue my learning. Like, wow, this really is true. To sit in a homeless shelter with she's passed away now, a lady called Anita, I think Anita St. John, and she'd been homeless herself, and then had come across this understanding, and then she'd found that, you know, she'd got homed, and she became a facilitator of this, and she sat sharing this understanding with people. And there was one lady who didn't want to be filmed, but in the end said she would, because she sat there and she said, Anita loves us. And when she was sharing, she said it was like a light bulb went off in my brain and everything was different. And she was sat there, she had nowhere to live, she doesn't know where her next meal's coming from, she didn't even have her teeth in. And she said something woke up within her, and she knew that she was all right, and she was just the same as everyone else. And I remember, I think I was 26 the first time, 26, 27 the first time I was out in America. And I remember just sitting there listening to these stories and being in these places and just thinking, it's true. What Roger was pointing to and telling me about, that I thought I knew was true, it's like it's true. This is true for everybody. And I got to see it in all of those places. And I think we together got to go to Nepal in 2015 after the earthquake. And we got to see people who had experienced loss of homes, loss of loved ones, sit and listen to this and light up with, wow, I'm all right. I'm all right in my grief. I'm all right in my worry. They didn't have to suddenly just be happy. It was about knowing that we're all right to experience. And I pinch myself sometimes, because I'm like, how was it that I got to be so lucky to come across this at such a young age? How is it then that I've got to literally travel all around the world and meet people and have people open their hearts to me on film and sit in on trainings? And there's been so much. It's funny, I think sometimes people come across the Three Principles and then they start getting interested in something else, like non-duality. And, you know, Sid was a non-dual teacher. He didn't use that language, but that's what he was pointing to. And they start then trying to compare it and say what's better and worse. And I've kind of watched this all unfold on Facebook and videos that people sometimes release. And I just think I've got nothing but gratitude to the Three Principles, Sydney Banks, to anyone I've ever listened to. And I listen to all kinds of teachers. They might not call themselves Three Principles, but I feel like anyone that's pointing people back within, they were trying to share the same message that Sid was. He had his way. But I don't feel the need to compare or contrast
or disrespect.
Just because I feel like I've been shown so much love and kindness. And yeah, there's been judgment. We're human. There's been judgment within the Three Principles community. It doesn't suddenly make you not human. Honestly,
I think
it makes you more human.
I think the beautiful thing about all of this, because we've been subjected to the odd little thing from now and again, is, you know, we're all working towards the same cause, and everybody on this screen is working towards the same cause. It's towards the upliftment of themselves and the upliftment of humanity. And that has to be commended in absolutely everybody who embarks on helping. And that's something that I think is really important. Just to be grateful for one another in spite of how we share, what we share. Just be grateful that one human being is trying to help the next human being have a nicer life. I think that's so important.
Just like to say, I'm very impressed with Lucia for waking up at 11:15,
Break time.
which is break time.
With a little burp. Thanks, love.
Thank you.
Cool. Break time, everyone. So we're going to come back at 11:30 UK time, 15 minutes. And then we're going to be talking about, our title is Looking Beyond Our Beliefs. Let's go and make a brew, as we say in Cumbria.
We always just say to people, just mute yourself and turn your video off. You don't have to leave and rejoin.
Yeah.
You can if you want.
Stop or pause, stop or pause.
Pause.
Definitely.
Mm.
Welcome back. We are with our child at this present moment because Auntie Sue has got
Her great Auntie Sue.
her great Auntie Sue,
Who is great.
who is awesome.
I suppose she might be dropped back off in here, depending on. She's generally quite happy just to sit and chew on things, but
Yeah. Okay. This next section we've called Looking Beyond Our Own Beliefs. Sounds a bit crap as a title, if I'm honest. Because it's something we've kind of heard so many times before. It doesn't really ring or zing with the true magnitude of that point. No, I'm not religious in any way whatsoever. I'm not religious. But I've got I feel like coming across the principles opened up my heart to esoteric teachings of all faiths, denominations, and points of view. But one of the things that I think is a very powerful teaching is the Book of Thomas, which was removed from the Bible 200 AD, around 200 AD. I love the words within the Book of Thomas. And apparently they are the actual words of Jesus Christ, who went round and he was giving talks, and there was Thomas, doubting Thomas. He was a scribe, he could write, and he wrote down, apparently this is what happened, he wrote down, and all the Book of Thomas is just a book of sayings. It's just I think it's 114 phrases, questions. It's on YouTube, you can find it. They were unearthed in 1950 in Nag Hammadi in Egypt, and a place in Syria. 3 copies were found in 2 separate places in storage jars, clay storage jars. And apparently in Syria, where 2 kids found it in a cave, they took it home and their mother used it to light the fire that night. So the Book of Thomas was actually bigger, but some of it was in Syria, but some of it was lost to fire. And obviously throughout that time, some of it has got to the point where they couldn't read it. So if you hear somebody reading the Book of Thomas, you'll often hear them finish on an "and." That's as far as that statement can be read. But what I love about that is when I've listened to it, I hear so much truth within it. It's like, for example, such simple sayings. It opened up my heart to the teachings of Jesus. Jesus wasn't a man, in my opinion, that spoke about religion. He was a man who spoke about life, living. People called him the living one in the Book of Thomas. He was called the living one because he was the one who found life. And that's what this conversation is about. This conversation is about finding life. We are already life. It's about finding ourself. And in the book of Thomas, a very simple statement is made, which I feel sums up the power of belief. He said, "It is done unto you as you believe." It is done unto you as you believe. Now, here was a man trying to explain reality to people, or an aspect of reality. It is done unto you as you believe. This point has never changed in 2000 years. It never changed before that. It's always been the way it has been. The way we believe about ourselves, about the world, creates our experience, which is why Sid said, you think it's real, it's not real. You just believe it to be real. The magnitude of the power of belief, the magnitude of the power of belief is one that, if I don't know if anybody's ever read the book or listened to Wayne Dyer speak. Is it Wayne Dyer? Placebo Man? You got the placebo?
Joe Dispenza.
Joe Dispenza. He speaks about a man who took a placebo because he had cancer, ended up taking a placebo. He didn't know he took a placebo in the trial. And after he took the placebo, his cancer vanished. He was later informed, contacted and said, right, you were part of the placebo trial, to which apparently this man was furious, so upset that he'd taken a placebo, he hadn't taken a real drug, and he thought, well, that can't be true, I can't have healed myself, and apparently his cancer came back when he started to believe that he was ill. And in and out this kind of went, so he went on another trial, he ended up getting another placebo in this trial, only his cancer vanished again, only to find out that he'd taken the placebo again. The odds of this happening, I don't know, but this is what's written. He speaks about in this book. And in the end, the cancer kills him. But two or three times he'd set himself free with the power of the belief that he was being healed by this drug that actually didn't exist. The power of the mind is a phenomenal thing. You know, we all know that stress can kill. Stress can stop the heart like that. What is the stress? Well, it's thought. Stress is thought. Stress is a perception created from thought, the way we believe a circumstance to be, which is creating our reality. And I think when we start to break stress, when we start to break beliefs down, that's when we start to understand. And when we start to understand, we can start to see through them. As we start to see through them, you won't evaporate. You know, Dave is a belief. What I refer to myself as is a belief. It's not who and what I actually am. It's a thought. Dave is a thought. It's a story. It's a story. It's a thought that everybody on this screen holds, and it's a thought that Jenny holds, but no two people on earth hold the same thought or belief about myself. It's all creation from within our own being. And I think when people start to recognize this, you know, it's not difficult to get rid of a belief. It's difficult when you go to war against them. But the moment they're forgotten, they don't have a hold over you. The moment, you see, what I tend to think of when it comes to the principles, and I try and find language to talk from what I've seen and what I understand about it, is that you're not looking to change anything other than your frequency of consciousness. You're not looking to change your thoughts. You know, I often like changing thoughts as to walking out into the sea and trying to push the waves back into the sea to make them so the sea isn't turbulent. We walk out into the sea and we go, no, don't be turbulent, sea. Waves, go back into the water. And in the meantime, we just make a right mess, get everyone wet, more waves are produced. So this isn't about changing thoughts. As our frequency rises, certain thought frequencies won't enter our being anymore. Or if they do, they don't have the hold that they once did. That's why Sid was always saying you're looking to change your level of consciousness. He never once spoke about changing thoughts. And what is a belief? It's a thought that we think is real. It's a thought that we think is true. We'll go into this over the next 3 days. We're going to break this down over the next 3 days, and hopefully you'll start to feel, get a sense, or see that everything really is one thing. There's one truth. There's one truth in this universe. And this universe has made itself out of itself and everything within it. When I talk about the universe, I'm not talking about the physical form. That's what it's made out of itself, including our bodies, including our characters, including the trees, including the seas, the fish, the insects, the moon, the sun, the galaxies. There is one source. And hopefully over the next 3 days, people will start to see that the source is them. They are the source, not the body, not the character. The character is a consequence of the source. But the magical phenomena of life itself that they truly are, with infinite potential. And when people start to break, when people's beliefs start to either just fade away, drip away into the background without any kind of loud shouting, oh, here I go, they just kind of vanish into the background. They no longer believed, and they're just no longer held, and they no longer hold the character prisoner anymore. Or perhaps they go as a massive flash of insight. As this takes place, it's like people start to find themselves more free. Jen spoke about lads in prison. I used to do work in prison. I remember this one lad come running up to me. And he said, Dave, I've been waiting a week for you to come back. He argued with me the whole time we were there. He was a Jehovah's Witness lad. He said, Dave, I've been waiting for you to come back. I said, what's going on, mate? What's going on? He's bouncing around. I said, what's going on? And he went, you know, what you were saying last week is true. I said, yeah. He said, no. He said, I went back to my cell. He said, I lay back on my bed and it hit me, the magnitude of what you were talking about. It's true. I said, yeah, I know. He said, Dave, I'm free. He said, I've never felt more free. He said, can you believe it? I'm stood in the middle of prison and I'm telling you, I've never felt more free. He said, these walls and these fences were not my prison. My prison was my own mind. He created such a character for himself that he couldn't see. He believed so many thoughts. He carried so many beliefs. And in a moment of realization, these beliefs were just brought out of the darkness into the light, and maybe not consciously, or perhaps consciously, I don't know, and seen for what they were. They were nothing. They were nothing appearing as everything. Funny that that's what quantum physics describes reality as. The power of belief is phenomenal, unbelievable.
I remember hearing one of Sid's talks. I can't find it again now, but I think you've said you've heard him say it. You can't remember what talk it was on, but there's no peace to be found in beliefs. And it's quite a big statement, because obviously some beliefs we think are righteous, or there's all different kinds. But what I heard was that to have a belief creates separation, and there isn't peace to be found in separation. But it doesn't mean we're not going to have beliefs. But I feel like you definitely hold them so much lighter, and you wouldn't necessarily argue them in the same way and defend them in the same way. Just quietly kind of. And I think it also speaks to how we can change our mind. Or our mind changes. We're free to think again and again and again. I think when we're wedded to a belief, it makes us rigid. And there's certain beliefs that I still carry, and it's really hard for me to not see them as true, in fact. But there's a little bit of me that kind of knows, well, not everyone sees this, so how can it be true, in fact? And it, with this understanding, we're never telling anyone what to do. I'm not saying get rid of beliefs or study your beliefs or beliefs are wrong. But I think we get to get interested. What are they? What are they made of? What are these things that run our lives and create difference that we defend? Have we ever had a belief that we held so tightly to and then it's dropped away and we've actually thought in the opposite way? Have we had a belief that seemed to run our lives and then that's just faded? And then life looked different. And you start to see that there isn't truth to be found in belief. It can feel true, but if it can change, it cannot be truth. It's not constant. It's not permanent. And I think the more that we allow our minds to change, they naturally will. Like, it's been fascinating watching Lucia. She'll be 7 months next week. Already creating little likes and things that she likes and she doesn't like, and
She's got little beliefs about certain people, hasn't she?
yeah. And you see that she gets more frustrated now than she used to, because she wants to be able to do things and she wants to get to that toy. But it's not wrong. She's not doing anything wrong. She's just alive and living, and that's what happens to us. We create ideas and concepts. She now turns her head to her name. So she's taken on this idea that, okay, when they say that word, that's something to do with me. And you see the absolute innocence in all of us, because that's what we all do. We're born as this kind of open space, and then we start making sense of what we see as this world and people, and we create concepts and beliefs and ideas. It's the most natural thing in the world. And I think when you start seeing it like that, you're probably less likely to go to war with it. We can all see that we've got certain beliefs that aren't healthy for us, don't help us. There's certain things that I still think that I know create struggle in my life, or feeling of suffering, but I can't quite let go of it. And that's what I love. Like, this conversation kind of opens up so much in us. And there's times where we feel so powerful, we feel like we've got such autonomy, and other times where we feel almost like, no, I'm kind of lost in this experience and it feels like it has me. And I think that's what you were speaking about too earlier, like our level of frequency, our level of consciousness is almost what determines whether or not we're kind of stuck in it, or we're kind of expansive and can see it for what it is. And that's not a judgment thing. Like, but I do feel like since coming across this, I've looked more towards the idea of what creates. And I think she was just making funny noises. No, it's not crying.
Oh, right, okay.
Funny noises. So we've been ring.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, offensive dad.
Overprotective.
Yeah. Overprotective.
I'm trying to think what I was saying.
Sorry.
That's all right. I didn't think I had baby brain, but I do have baby brain a little bit. I've noticed when I've been putting things in my calendar on the wrong month. And
for the last 7 years.
It's not. I'm normally very organised. Yeah, I don't know what I was saying. I lost my chair. That's all right.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I had Lucy so much.
But I feel like there's something there's a willingness in me that's coming across this, an openness to be wrong. there's an openness in me to let new thought in. Whereas I feel I used to have quite a stubbornness. No, I am like this. It's because my sister was like this with me. It's because my mum and dad used to say that to me. And I was quite stubborn and fixed in my ideas of who I was, and a bit unbending, I guess, in letting them go. And I know that if I used to get in a mood, it takes quite a lot of effort to stay in a bad mood with someone. But I'd stay in it, and I could stay in it for at least a week. And since being around this understanding and sitting in on trainings and taking trainings, I just feel like the movement of thought, the movement of experience is quicker. Like, I can't hold on to it as long. I can get really upset by something, and then very quickly I can calm down and see it differently. And it's that movement. And I guess we all try and hold things to, you said that, so you mean that. You said that in that moment, I'm going to hold you to it. I thought that in that moment, I'm going to hold myself to it. And we don't allow the movement, and we stagnate.
And that stagnation's like, that's going against the very nature of the universe, because the nature of the universe isn't one of stagnant. It's one of eternal change, constant change. Nothing in nature sits still. Everything is always moving and flowing and coming and going and coming. I love Sid's definition of ego. He said, ego is everything you believe to be true, everything you believe to be true and real about yourself in this world. That's Sid's definition of ego, everything you believe to be true and real about this world. Exactly the same statement as it's done unto you as you believe. Ego really is a separate identity from the whole. An individual, there's the whole, and then there's myself. There's the rest of the world, and then there's myself. There's the rest of the universe, and then there's myself. An idea of separation, an idea that we're not all one force of life, manifest in many different forms. But ego, the thing that the Buddhists spend years and Hindus spend years meditating to try and see past, can be seen for what it is when it's realized. It's thoughts, it's beliefs that we hold on to, creates our character, creates our behavior, creates the way we interact with the world and people, creates the way we interact with ourselves. I loved it that you used to say you didn't think you had an ego because you were meek and mild, and then you realised, oh, I've got a humongous ego. Again, we're not talking about an enemy. Nothing to get rid of. There's something to be seen for what it is, because ultimately the ego has no power. Only the power that we believe it to have. If you want to, only the power that we believe it to have. Thoughts have no power, you know. Of themselves, they have no power. No thought. Only that we grant it or believe it. The depth of which we believe it. We have this magical force of life, and it has the capacity to take on thoughts and grow them into beliefs, or see them for what they are, or not see them at all. I love what Jen said, though. It's like when you start to become aware of this, you start to hold on to your beliefs. You have to get rid of your beliefs. You can hold on to your beliefs, but you start to hold on to them lighter. They become lighter. And all of a sudden, there's new opportunity to see things differently. And the moment you see something differently, you are literally creating a new reality or a new timeline for yourself.
people. I remember speaking to a friend once about belief. She carries such deep beliefs. And she said, yeah, I've got a suit of armor on, Dave. Of course I've got a suit of armor on. I'm like, why do you have a suit of armor on, though? And she said, well, you know, it's a dangerous world. I said, it's funny, I don't see that. I see a beautiful world full of beautiful people. And she said, but that's not true. Look at what goes on in the world. I said, yeah, but that's only stuff I'm told on the news. I said, my day-to-day interaction with the world is 99.999999% of the time really nice. And I'd been working with this girl and doing trees, and I know we'd had a good day. And I said to her, but do you not understand? If you've got a suit of armor on, you may have needed to put that suit of armor on at one point. And she did at one point in her life, she needed to put on this suit of armor to get her through a day or a chapter of life where she felt like she needed to protect herself. And she did. And from her story, yes, she did need to protect herself. She was, you know, she was put in a rather uncomfortable position. She forgot to take it off when it was all over. And she continued to walk through life wearing this suit of armor, which she believed was keeping her safe, but in actual fact was keeping her in her prison. Suit of armor was actually her prison now. It's absolutely right. Prison walls will stop people getting into prison. Damn right they will. Those barbed wire, razor wire fences will stop people climbing over and getting into prison.
Yeah.
But they also stop you from being free. You know, and most of the beliefs that people carry around, they develop in childhood. We develop them in childhood and we don't question it anymore. We don't question the validity of it. Is this still relevant to this day? We did some work once with a young girl who, God bless her, it was a 36th offence that we wrote a letter for court for, managed to keep her out of prison for the 4th time or something. She'd been in prison. She was only 26. She'd had a terrible time. She'd been abused by her own family. She'd been raped by her own brother. And again, this girl, like, she fought everybody. She fought the world. She fought the world. We went to probation with her. She comes away from probation, this beautiful lady. She comes away, I will watch my language. She goes, well, she was a proper see you next Tuesday. I'm like, really? She was lovely. Did you not hear her trying to help you? No. She was just a proper see you next Tuesday. And I'm like, I think that might be going on in your mind, love. Because that's not what we saw. We saw a lady really desperately trying to help you. And I ended up having a bit of a conversation with her. And it was quite straight. I was quite blunt and quite straight and explained to her, you are fighting a world that isn't fighting back. You're like a one-woman war. Going to war with everybody. Starting wars, but you believe that you are a victim of all of this. You believe you're the victim, when in actual fact you're the perpetrator. And this girl, it was quite a blunt, straight conversation for about 20 minutes. And she looked at me at the end of it. She spoke to me at the end of it. And she went, I can't disagree with a single thing you've spoken about there. This girl, she carried around such beliefs that she developed in such a young age. She still carried them. And she interacted with the world with them. And she didn't understand why her life was so hard. God bless this lass. She went through hell. She went through hell. I understand why she was wearing the suit of armor, but the suit of armor no longer served her when it came to trying to get a job. You know, you meet a potential employer with your suit of armor on, you're not very likely to get a job. And she didn't. And then if she did get a job, her suit of armor was so powerful that she would soon lose that job because she was so confrontational. all these beliefs she carried, all these thoughts that she thought kept her safe, were in actual fact one of the biggest hindrance to her existence. And after our conversation the next day, she said to Jenny, I thought Dave was a proper see you next, she loved that word, see you next Tuesday last night. But I feel very different now. And the next time we saw her, she was gentler, wasn't she? She managed to get a job and she managed to hold it down. She became a more happy person, a more buoyant human being. The things that she thought were keeping her safe were in actual fact her prison. Like Sid said, there is no peace to be found in beliefs. A belief, what is a belief? A belief is something we will defend. People defend their beliefs left, right, and centre globally. That's why there's religious wars, that's why there's political wars, that's why there's wars full stop. That's why there's arguments. That's why relationships break down. Because people defending their egos, thinking that they're right. I can be a right bugger for this. I can be a proper bugger for thinking I'm right. But thankfully, I've woken up enough to eventually come back and go, hang on a minute. And I can make the necessary adjustments and I can make the necessary apologies. I can also forgive myself.
I know that Roger described it to us as, he said, oh, you've all heard of rose tinted glasses, like when people view things that have happened in the past and they make it all kind of rosy when actually at the time it was shit. And we said, but what we don't realise is we're all wearing glasses. And he said, these glasses are covered in scratches and it totally skews what we see. And he just said, learning about these principles, it's like you get to clean your glasses a bit. That little scratch gets cleaned out and you get a bit of a clearer picture, because everything we see through our own belief system. Everything we view through our beliefs. We create the experience of what we're looking at through how we believe. And that's powerful to start to realize. That's life-changing. Like, you start to see that any interaction that we have, the idea of this character that we're meeting, we create the idea of who we're meeting. So some people meet Dave and they have an opinion of him given how they see him. I've got a very different opinion of him. Get 10 different people, they'll all see Dave differently.
I often say, I'm so grateful that my father and Jenny see a different Dave.
You do often say that.
Oh.
And the more that we see that, you get to realize we have so much power within us to see a different world if we are open to it and if we want to. Like, there's been times in my life where there's people that have driven me mad and I want to blame them. There's a little part of me that's like, surely you're the exception to this. Surely you are really annoying and everyone thinks it. But then I know that they're happily married or have children who love them. I'm like, no, it has to be coming from me. And it's helpful to know that. And I'd like to say that I never find people annoying anymore, but I do. And I do, it's like I want to blame them, but you're onto it. You know that your experience of life comes through us, not at us. And that's people, places. Like, I often use Rusty as an example, like when I'm in a good feeling and high vibration or whatever you want to call it, a high level of consciousness, he can do no wrong. Even if he bites me, it was because he was scared. And when I'm in a low mood, it's like, he's annoying. I'm like, you horrible little dog, I think in my head. And I'm like, oh my God. And you see, like, our judgments of life, our experience of life doesn't come from the external. It comes through our mind, through thought, and our beliefs colour stuff. They completely colour what we view. And if we don't know that, then we will blame and judge other people. We will blame the world, we'll blame people, we'll blame circumstance. And sometimes it feels like that's the easier option. It'd be so good if you could just blame someone else. But actually, that's not an empowering thing, because you can't change anyone else. I remember someone on the last in-person event we did with Dick and Bettinger, there was a lady on it who said she kind of gets absolutely fed up in her job and fed up with her boss and all of her colleagues and what they're like, and then she'll like apply for a new job and she'll get the new job, and then very shortly she's having all the same kind of issues and people just don't treat you right and your bosses are like this. And she said she was sat there, and over the 3 days she was getting more and more uncomfortable, but she started to see that she was the common denominator in all these different jobs she'd had, and that maybe she had to look at herself and not blame the job or the people within the job. And it was really uncomfortable for her. And that's the thing, this can be a bit uncomfortable, because when we notice things about our character or creation that we suffer, it's not very nice to think, I'm doing this to myself innocently, but I'm doing this to myself. And there's a lady that we work with who I absolutely loved working with, because she was like having insight in real time, and she'd been going through a breakdown, and she'd actually gone and spent a night or two in a psychiatric ward, but she'd been released because someone was going to have a safe place for her at home. And she said, as she was kind of having a breakdown, it just kept coming to mind, I'm doing this to myself, I'm doing this to myself. It was like a mantra that was just coming to her, and she didn't know what it meant. And then shortly after that episode, she came to this conversation. We started having online Zoom calls, one-to-ones, and she started having insight like on camera in these sessions. And you could see something had already started to awaken in her before she'd even heard about this. Something, she'd got to the point where life felt so bad that she was having a breakdown of character, breakdown of everything she believed. And then she started having like new thought and new perspective, and looking at life in a different way, and being grateful for the breakdown. And it's interesting because we so often want to prevent ourselves from having uncomfortable feelings. We're afraid of them. But there's so much that we can learn from them. And it's not that we have to study them, but it's almost like just deeply listening. If we're seriously uncomfortable about a situation or a person or an aspect of ourselves, it's not telling us a truth. It's telling us what we think. It's telling us about belief. It's telling us how far from truth we've gone. I don't know if you told that story. I think you told it on the catch up the other day. But I loved what you realised the next day.
Yeah, I had a bit of a rough day the other day. Like I ended up doing some tree work, which I hate doing now. And I was all in my head. I was up this hedge, chopping this hedge, and such a bad mood. I stuck the chainsaw in my leg. But thankfully, it hit my Kevlar pants and clogged the chain up. If it had gone that much round, it would have hit my inner thigh, and it would have made a proper mess of my leg. Like, I mean, I threw the chainsaw out the tree, and I was like, fucking crap job, but I don't even know what the hell. I'm going home. I went home.
You have to make your mum cry.
I made your mum cry, bless her. She's like, she was saying, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, this isn't your fault. This isn't, you're entitled to want a beautiful garden. I said, this isn't your fault. This is me. I've got no idea why I carry this belief about tree work. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I fire up a chainsaw, unless I'm doing some firewood. I'm just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it, whether it's because I don't want to hurt the trees, whether it's because I'm bored of it. I don't have a clue. I can't pinpoint it. I don't need to pinpoint it. I'm very aware that I've got ego around it. I've got ego around this subject. And with that, I went and had a bit of a meltdown for the rest of the day, sat in the bath for 3 hours. And it was like I was on a bad trip. It was like I was having a bad trip. Just such dark thoughts coming in. Now, these thoughts could never have entered if I'd not lost my rag in the first place. I invited them in by lowering my consciousness, by lowering my frequency of being. How did I do that? By believing in a negative reality. Believing the negative reality was somehow more real and true than any other reality possibility. And then the next day I got up and certain things came to me in that moment, that day, like all of a sudden out of the blue, I don't want to be bullied, but sentences would come into my mind. Now, nobody's bullying me. I think it's a belief that I hold somewhere deep within what you might call the subconscious. I don't want to be bullied. I got a little bit bullied at school. It really wasn't comfortable. And I think that's probably why I became a hard man and toughened myself up and put on my suit of armor and my big muscles that I used to have and throw my weight around and learn to intimidate. And then the next day I was just minding my own business, and a little voice came in my head. And it just said, the further you go into suffering, the more into unreality you are entering. The further you go into suffering, the more into unreality you are entering. You are getting further away from true reality, not closer to the true reality, not more true, not more real. You are going further away from true reality. True reality being one of absolute perfection, the magnitude of life, the beauty of love, the connected oneness of all things. Think about it. Love unifies people. If tomorrow the whole world woke up in love with one another, what would happen to this world? Well, the wars would stop. Greed would come to an end. Utopia would be born. There wouldn't be starving people. Love wouldn't allow that. Love doesn't want to see suffering. Love does not hurt. Fear hurts. People often confuse love and fear. Poles apart. Love is the unity of all things, the oneness of all things, the oneness of the universe. Universe, uni, one, verse. So what is it? It's antithesis. It's when the moment you divide the universe into two or billions of pieces, or apparent pieces, which is where we seem to exist within this belief as human beings that we're all separate from one another. We're not separate from one another. We are all born of the same earth. I think one of the things that one of the astronauts, first thing he said when he looked back at Earth, he said, we truly are all one. When he looked back at our one globe sat in what appears to be space, came back with, we truly are all one, but we divide ourselves within this world into religious categories, into political categories, into whatever category we believe ourselves to be, even male and female. When in actual fact, we're all born of the same earth. We're born of what people call Mother Earth, which is born of the universe, so it can't be separate from any of it. We just believe ourselves to be separate. The true reality that exists is one of connection, which is love. I don't really like the word connection either, because to say connection, it implies you could disconnect it. And it can never be disconnected. Separation has never, ever, 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 ever taken place. It's never taken place. Separation from the whole has never taken place, ever. It doesn't exist. It just appears to exist because of thoughts. We think We are this body, we think we are this, we think we are that, we believe we are this, we believe we are that, we believe we are this body. We believe that there is infinite amount of things, when in actual fact, the source of everything creates everything out of itself, including us. So therefore, if everything is created out of itself, everything must be it. That's why the mystics throughout time have used the ocean as a metaphor for the oneness of life. Yes, it creates waves, but every single living being is a wave, like a wave on the ocean. They're all born of the same force, the same energy field. So the separation never took place. So the more divided I feel within my being, the more suffering I experience, the further away from love, fulfillment, contentment, acceptance I find myself, the more into unreality I have entered. I believe that reality to be more true and real. That's how delusional I became. Because it looks real. But that's why Sid said, it's not real, you just think it's real. Our separation that takes place on this earth is simply a belief. It's a thought. I remember being at the soup kitchen in South Africa and coming out and my friend saying the problem's too big. Problem's too big place in South Africa. Look at this, 300 homeless people, not even scratching the surface of Cape Town. She's right. It really wasn't scratching the surface of Cape Town's homelessness problem. She's crying her eyes out, saying the problem's too big. And Jen and I sat down next to her and we said, but it's not. The problem that South Africa faces isn't that big. In fact, if anything, it's tiny. It's nothing. It's massive if you look at it from the point of view of, yeah, we've got to sort out equal housing, you know, redistribution of money and land, which is a big thing out in South Africa. Politics, you know, if we've got to get equal opportunities for people in education and everything like that, yeah, it looks absolutely gigantic. Where the hell do you start? But if you were to boil it down and start to look at what it's made from, what is it that's the glue that's holding this South Africa problem together, you realize, well, it's the way people think about one another. It's the thought thing. The moment people change their minds about one another in South Africa will change. It will change accordingly because people will do different. They will be different with one another. Now that goes for everything. That goes for the globe. That goes for any, not just South Africa, any relationship we have within our families. We think the character that we experience of a person is real. No, it's a character that we make up for that individual. Like I said, I'm so thankful that my father and Jenny see me very, very differently. You know, and I'm glad I don't see my mum the way my dad sees my mum. I'm really thankful for that, because that would be horrible. And then it's like when people talk about people, you know, you often hear people talk about people and you're like, wow, that's not how I see in that circumstance. I meet somebody very different. And you start to piece the piece of the puzzles together. And I'm talking about, and Jen's talking about, and Sid was talking about, and what everybody's talking about is that reality is coming through us, not to us. We are the manifesto of reality. This magical display of consciousness that we experience is the magical display of our own reality that we are generating. From the moment we're born to the moment we die in this human form, this temporary human form that is so finite. But the force of consciousness, thought, mind has been there since time immemorial. That's why Sid described it as truth. You're looking for truth. Everybody's looking for truth, but this search is continuously like it's us it's lost in our being mesmerized by the realities that we create and our belief that they are somehow fixed and real.
as opposed to realizing, no, they're being generated by the way we think about one another and about ourselves. And it's a thought thick, and a thought can change in a moment, and it always does. Perhaps we don't notice the moment of change. It's like when I used to have depression, I'd wake up first thing in the morning and I would be at peace. First thing in the morning, I'd be at peace. And then I'd look around where I was living at the time and go, why the hell am I waking up here? And then all of a sudden it would come back to me, oh shit, you're having an affair, Dave. You know, your business has gone to shit. Everybody's pissed off with you. And the moment I remembered that, the moment that thought occurred within my mind, bang, down I went. Until I thought that thought, I was buoyant, I was peace every single morning. And there was times when I'd put on a DVD and I'd watch a funny film and I'd find myself laughing at this film. All these thoughts had left me. All these beliefs were no longer in my conscious awareness, and they'd left, they'd moved through. And I'd find myself laughing at a funny film. Where's my depression? If I suffered from depression as an illness, they would have to exist in that moment. But if the experience didn't, I was in happiness, I was enjoying. I remember watching this film and getting to the end and then going, oh, what was I worrying about? Oh, fucking hell, I'm there again. I was doing it to myself, but I had no idea that the way that I use thought creates reality. My reality, the only reality I'll ever know. And in turn, I help to create a collective reality for humanity. Some people will have heard this. I know I read it on community group last week, but this was a talk by somebody who's nothing to do with the principles, but he was actually talking about the Essenes. And the Essenes were a people that who lived in Israel, and they weren't Jewish. They saw themselves as a separate entity or a type of human. And they said it's got nothing to do with skin color, hair, or anything like that. Anybody could be an Essene, but it had to do with their inner luminescence, the inner light that they carried, the light of love, the light of life, the light of consciousness, that they carried within themselves and shared with the world. And the Essenes, apparently they had no hierarchy in their culture. There was no person in charge, there was no higher or lower people. They shared everything. Man, woman, and child were all equal. They were all seen as equal. Everybody was seen as equal. And this was a talk I was listening to. It's on Spotify. The Mystery of the Essenes by Theodore Nottingham. I heard in the middle of this talk he was giving, something just pricked my ears as I heard this statement. So I rewound it and I wrote it down. This was 2,000 years ago. Jesus spent time with the Essenes. He learnt from the Essenes. Thought was therefore considered to be the highest, most powerful force in the universe, as it was seen as the instigator of both feeling and action. The Essenes, therefore, trained themselves to harness this power in a positive way, knowing that each thought affected the lives of everyone on the planet through the vibrations they sent forth into the collective unconscious. I'm just going to read that one more time. Is there a lot of background noise? Is everybody getting a lot of background noise? Okay. Thought was therefore considered to be the highest, most powerful force in the universe, as it was seen as the instigator of both feeling and action. The Essenes, therefore, trained themselves to harness this power in a positive way, knowing that each thought affected the lives of everyone on the planet through the vibrations they sent forth into the collective unconscious. Power of thought, the highest, most powerful force in the universe. And if we take a moment to think about that, you will see that everybody's acting according to the way they think and believe, including ourselves. And you'll suddenly start to realize when Jen, I remember Jen telling me about a lady who came to one of her retreats and said, oh, what you're saying makes so much sense. My husband he translated original biblical text. And he once came in, this was 20 years previous to this retreat that she was on. And he came in and said, I think I've discovered like the original opening of the New Testament. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He said, I think that's a really inaccurate translation. He said, if I was to translate that myself, he said, I would translate what's written in Hebrew as, in the beginning was thought. Thought was with God, and thought was God. The Creator, think about it. We have this creative force within ourselves. We are this creative force. We are this creative force. Jesus would say, he said, the kingdom you're looking for is inside the heart of every man, woman, and child. The kingdom, God's kingdom, is within the heart of every man, woman, and child. He also said, it's all over the face of the earth, but mankind cannot see it. They're too busy looking at the details. The domain of the devil's in the details. The details are the things that distract us from waking up to our inner luminescence that's always shining within ourselves. We're so busy looking at the details of our thoughts and feelings and actions that we forget to take a step before and go, where is all this coming from? What is this light of life? Because everybody is the inner luminescence. Everybody has to be the inner luminescence. Otherwise, you wouldn't be alive. You wouldn't be aware. You wouldn't be the light of life.
I was going to say, because we're going to be having lunch in a moment. After lunch, I've put questions, observations, and reflections. I'd love it if it could be a time where we like share. I love hearing from people. So if over lunchtime anything pops into your mind that you want to ask, or things that you've seen, or things that you notice, like make a note of it.
Or anything you want to expand on.
Yeah, or if you have questions or anything like that, because the learning comes from everyone. Like we're all learners and we're all teachers. And I love it when it is a bit more interactive, because sometimes we've had questions, observations, reflections, and then we sit there and no one says anything. And we can fill the space, but we love it when it we get stuff back. And also we know then where to take it and what people are hearing, and do we need to be a bit clearer on certain things. But when we share insights that we've had and observations we've made, or ask questions, it really helps other people, because often someone else will have the same question as you, but maybe just want to ask, or what you've started to see really resonates with someone else. So that is a time for that. And then after that, we'll have a break, and we're going to have Dickon Bettinger and his talk. He's called Be the Heart. And yeah, it wouldn't be a retreat without Dickon being a little bit a part of it, because he's always been such a big part of, well, my life since I came across the principles. And then every retreat I've run, he's either been a zoomed in speaker, or he's somehow part of it.
He's been so kind to us.
Yeah. So we're coming back at 2 o'clock. And that'll be questions, observations, and reflections.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, lovely to see you.
Mhm. Thank you.